Good morning. Sorry, I haven't seen you. It has been a wonderful week. This is day 5 of Power Skills 2020. For those of you who've been in other sessions, we certainly hope that you've enjoyed it. We value your feedback, and you'll get a evaluation form next week, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. It's interesting because at the beginning we thought maybe we shouldn't have sessions on Saturday because we're not sure who's going to show up, particularly in the morning, but here you are. So congratulations for investing in yourself, no less on a Saturday morning when you could be doing plenty of other things or nothing at all. So welcome, and it's wonderful that you could all be here. I invite you to use the chat to post any questions you have. And at the end, we'll get to those questions. So feel free to start writing in the chat. And also what's been nice during Power Skills is that people engage with each other during the chat. So if you have questions or comments and you hear something you like, don't like, have questions, just throw that all in the chat, engage as much as you want. So you all know we're live on Facebook. If for some reason you want to remain anonymous, you can just click on your photo on the top right. You'll see 3 dots and you can rename yourself. And while we love to see you, so we love to have everybody on camera, but if you're uncomfortable with that or would rather not, or you haven't done your hair yet, and it is Saturday, or you're eating your oatmeal, you can just turn that camera off and there's absolutely no problem with that either. So before we get started, I do want to introduce you to Dr. Saggers. We all know him at CATS. He's a big supporter at CATS, and I had the pleasure of having him as an instructor, and it was really life-changing, actually, and I can't overstate that enough. So it's wonderful that you're all here today. If you haven't had a chance to meet him before, you're going to absolutely love this session of this, I have no doubt. I'm actually going to, let me get back on here. I'm going to give you a little introduction, and then you'll get to know him, of course, as you go through this session. But Bob is a leadership consultant with more than 30 years experience in instructional psychology and adult education, like I mentioned, at McGill, where he's been teaching since 1988. He was a winner of the award for distinguished teaching, and I'm not at all surprised about that. Without any further ado, let's please put our hands together, either literally, or you can use your reaction button down at the bottom like I just did to welcome Dr. Bob Saggers.
Great. Thanks, Rosalia, for the warm introduction. And just want to start off by saying that you and your team at CATS deserve all of our admiration for organizing this virtual conference. I was just talking with the organizers earlier on, and more than 3,500 people have participated, and also many more at Facebook afterwards. One of the things that I've really noticed, and by participating, I don't really post that much on LinkedIn, and I was really amazed at the posts that I made that were over 2,200 views in just over 6 days. I was really pleased to see comments from former students, so some of my former students are joining in today, and also children of people that I've worked with corporately, are joining in today as well. So I welcome everyone. And to echo what Rosalia was saying, I'm really impressed with your commitment to ongoing learning, to devote your Saturday morning to participating. We are indeed living in unprecedented times. Some people refer to it as the VUCA world. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And this really focuses in on the importance on career planning and development. If we don't control our destiny, other people will. So what I'm going to do right now is just review the learning objectives. Let's see. Oops. So we'll start off with just some definitions. What do we mean by career planning and development? Different people have different understandings. And then we're going to provide a model that as we go through life, we actually go through career development phases and look at some pointers on how to navigate each. As we go through this, I'll try to give you some of my personal and professional experiences as well. Then understanding what your personality type is. and then discussing its impact on the choices that we make. And then lastly, hopefully as a result of today's session, you'll be able to apply some of the learning to support your own career planning and development in the future. So just quickly, why a personality-based approach? So according to Tigger and Baron Tigger, in a book they wrote, Do What You Are, that's been published, many new editions since, they say that traditional approaches, while they're good, it's only part of the story. They tend to focus in on what you're good at or what you enjoy and what your values are. But it tends to miss the personality dimensions. So as a person, in terms of your personality, what energizes you? What gets you up in the morning? What do you enjoy? I told my daughters when they were growing up, whatever you do, chase your passion, not your pension. We spend a lot of time at work. So what really energizes you? But also, how much interaction do we want with others? Is it a source of frustration or is it a source of excitement? And then how much structure do we need? So when we look at personality, we also need to look at the organizations that we work with. To what extent is our personality aligned with the organizations? And one of the things that you could all confirm is that the better the match is between who we are in terms of our personality, the more satisfaction, the greater the performance. We're more willing to perform. We're more willing to go beyond and above what the job requires. So just a few definitions. So when we talk about a career, it's really a lifelong sequence of behaviors and attitudes associated with past, present, and future experiences and roles. So we look at the past, but also where we're at now and where do we want to go. Career planning is really all of those activities aimed at helping you select different jobs, different organizations, and it involves gathering information and decision making. And lastly, career development is all of those activities that we use. It could include formal and informal education, skill training, feedback, coaching, mentoring, and also volunteering to help us in our career. Over the years, I've done a lot of volunteer work, and without a doubt, while you're volunteering your time and you're giving up your time and you're doing things for free, there's a lot of payback as well in terms of helping you develop the skills that you could use professionally. So we're going to look at career development phases. And maybe just before going on to career development phases, just to let you know is that we'll be doing the questions afterwards. So I've allotted anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes afterwards. Jot note, put your questions in the text chat and we'll pick them up later. Erik Erikson was a developmental psychologist and a psychoanalyst, and he did a lot of the early work in looking at how people progress through life. And he identified 8 developmental stages from infancy right to end of life. And we could apply that same reasoning to our career. So there's a beginning of our career. So once we've finished our formal education, or even people have started their career earlier on in life, before completing their studies. There's an adolescence part of our career. We've started and now we're maturing, we're growing, we're getting new experiences. And then the adult age of the career where we make a contribution. And then lastly, we're at the end of our career. So what I like to do is we'll just do a quick poll. And okay, so I want to get to the first poll. So I might need some help in terms of doing that. I don't see all of the polls listed in a orderly fashion. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is just check on where do you feel that you're at in terms of your career? Beginning, adolescence, adult. So we've got 66 out of 66 reporting. I'll let everybody report. Okay, just give a few more seconds for those that haven't reported yet. We're up to 86%. Okay, we're stuck at 86%. Okay, so let's look at this. So the 34% are either at the beginning or the adolescence. So in terms of what you're really looking for probably from the session is how do you get started? How do you start developing yourself? And those that are in the adult session, 56, how do you navigate your career? And it depends upon the reactions that you're getting. And there's 10% that are like me that are really at the end of their career now. Key thing to keep in mind about these career phases is it's a hierarchy. So the success at the beginning phase will really help us in the adolescence phase and so on. Okay, so let's look at each of these phases. So what I'm going to do is, I should have done that. I'll share the results with you so you see what the results are that I just commented on.
Dr. Saggers, just to let you know, we've had a few questions.
Yeah.
There's at least 4 people who are saying they didn't know how to answer the poll because they're in the midst of a career transition.
Okay, so in the transition, in terms of their career so far, would they be at the beginning of their career, mid-career, or at the adult phase of the career? So just to choose which they think best represents them, because we can make a transition at any of the different phases. Does that help?
Yeah, I see that people are saying, yeah, that's helpful. So they put it at the beginning if they were at the beginning. So that's what, yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, great. So let's see. So let's look at each of these phases. So really at the beginning phase, you're identifying what you want to become. So in terms of my own experience, when I was a teenager, I got very interested in psychology and more specifically clinical psychology. So I read a lot about it. So that's the exploration phase. But then as I went through university, one of the courses that I took at the end of my BA was a course in organizational development that really changed my mind. Then I was more interested in really working with people, helping people, but in an organizational context or a work context. So when I graduated from university, I couldn't get a job in my chosen field, which was human resources. I worked as a claims adjuster. And there were some elements of that job that were in line with my career, with my aspirations and my personality, but there really just wasn't a good fit. So as a result of that, what I did was start asking around and through friends. So finally, I got a job entry-level job in human resources down in the townships with Dominion Textile. And then after a year and a half, started to get antsy, moved back to Montreal, and I became a manager of staffing in an organization in Montreal. So the exploration phase is really coming to grips with what career do you want to identify with, and also starting to develop a career orientation and then making plans. So at the end of this phase, you either come out of it with a professional identity. I'm an HR person, or I'm a finance person, or I'm an engineering person. So you come up with some identity in terms of who you are and what do you want to do. If you're not able to do that, you're confused in terms of where do you move next. So there's a confusion of roles. If you master this turning point, then you're going to be more motivated to continue in your chosen identity. Key thing to keep in mind with these phases is that we can go back. So after the beginning of career, as you move to adolescence, you can clarify your roles. In the next phase, it's the adolescence phase. So you start belonging to an organization or a professional group. So in my case, I became a director of the Association of Human Resource Professionals of Quebec. And then when I moved into consulting, I became a certified management consultant. And so you're establishing yourself, you're progressing. I moved from a consultant to a senior consultant to a principal in the firm. And your development is really connected to how much you feel that you can advance. So if we feel that we have opportunities to advance, then we develop ourselves. So we can go back to formal education. So a lot of you that were former students were working when you took my courses, so you wanted to further develop. At the end of this phase, it's really a question of do we belong somewhere, or are we isolated? So the more that we belong, the more that we're going to want to make a contribution and move to the next phase. So at the adult age of your career, you start making a contribution to an organization or a profession. So you look at what contribution do you want to make? And then you also focus on developing skills that will further your contribution. So in my case, I made a contribution both professionally as well as through my volunteer work as well. So I got involved in teaching. So apart from my consulting practice, I've been associated with McGill since 1989. And then also when you're at that adult phase, then you start exerting leadership. You want to move into management. You want to make a deeper contribution. And when you look back at this phase, it's the difference between feeling that you're making a contribution versus stagnating and a regression. And then lastly, the end of the career. When you look back at your career, it's called an integration phase. You look at your achievements, what you have you become. So you evaluate. So you could decide to retire, or you might want to move on to a new career or a new job. A lot of people at end of career are going into social entrepreneurship, trying to give back to society. And you might start developing new skills to optimize your contribution as well. And at the end, you look back at your career, and do you feel satisfied? Are you integrated, or are you frustrated? And if you're frustrated, what can you do to ease this frustration? Where do you feel that you can make a contribution? So in terms of my own personal situation, I love what I do. I tell people that I will only retire when I'm not mentally or physically able to do what I do. I enjoy making a contribution to my students, to my clients, and helping them develop both their leadership and their careers. So just before going, there's a couple of polls. We'll start with the next one. So where's how do I get to the next poll? I just see so maybe somebody could handle the poll. So the next one, how many of you are familiar with the MBTI and already know your MBTI type? Okay, so we got 45% reporting. So we're up 85%. Okay, 88%. So I'll just give you a few more seconds for those. Okay, so let's end the polling, and I'll show you the results. So basically, we're split 56 versus 44%. So most of you know. So for those of you that know, this will be a refresher. And for those of you that know, you'll get an understanding of what your preferences are, and also what your type is. So let's stop. I'll stop sharing these results. Can we have the next poll, please? Okay, so, oops. Okay, just hold on a sec. Okay, just let me back up. So I messed up. Sorry. So I thought there was another poll there. So what I'll do is I'm going to go through the Myers Briggs a little bit, letting you know what the Myers Briggs is. So it's based on the work of Carl Jung. So Carl Jung was a contemporary of Freud, and he published a book called Psychological Types in 1921. It's an interesting story in terms of how the Myers-Briggs came about, and it was a daughter and a mother team. So Catherine Briggs is the mother, and Isabel Briggs Myers is the daughter. And they developed it over a period of 15 years, and it was first published in 1962. Initially just used as a tool for research and also to support education. So it was used by the Educational Testing Service. They wrote a book about how it was developed, a fascinating story. And Catherine Briggs, the mother, she was really interested in knowing what made people tick. Her husband got a job in the war effort, and he was like a round peg in a square hole. It didn't really fit. So she was really interested from the beginning of understanding how people's personality influence their career choices. It's the most widely used instrument for normal personality differences. And the reason why I like it, it's supported by a lot of research and also resource material as well. And it's also been validated into many different languages. So the first, just before going into the first scale, and there's 4 scales, I want to say some caveats. We need to be careful when we use instruments. They give us some indication of who we are, but we need to be careful that we don't read too much into them at times. The key thing is we use all preferences. So even though we have a preference for extroversion, let's say, we are capable of introverted moments. So we use all preferences to a greater or lesser extent though. And your type is really made up of those preferences that you use the most. Always reminded there are no good or bad types. There are no types that you should ascribe to be. All have value, all have blind spots, all make a contribution. So the key thing is knowing who you are and doing what you are, you're going to be more successful. It's not a test, it's an indicator. So the Myers Briggs Type Indicator. So it doesn't measure how good you are. Okay. And I always tell people, you are the expert in determining what your type is, because it has implications for you that you need to consider. And lastly, personalities are affected by so many other things. So we don't need to oversimplify or misuse them, or sometimes use them as an excuse. I'm sorry I did this, but I'm a, whatever. So and 2 people that have the same type will be different. because their life experiences are different. Okay, so now let's go to the poll. Oops, not to the poll yet. Sorry about that. So very briefly, extroversion and introversion, according to the MBTI, is where do you orient yourself? Where do you get your energy from? So extroverts get their energy from outside themselves, from people, from things, from ideas, whereas introverts really get their energy from within themselves. Extroverts need external stimulation. When extroverts don't have external stimulation, they feel lethargic. They're not energized. Whereas introverts, it's the opposite. Introverts need quiet time to internalize, to think about their thoughts. Extroverts want occupations that allow them to be with other people, whereas introverts need time to be alone. One of the think of extroverts having a lot of breadth involved in a lot of things, but introverts really will go deeply into something, so more in depth. And a telltale sign of extroverts versus introverts is that extroverts are after thinkers. Extroverts will say something and they'll say, "Why did I just say that?" Whereas introverts are forethinkers. They think before they say. So very rarely will introverts say something that hasn't been well thought out. So now's this time of the poll. Based on that understanding, where do you think you are? E or I? So time for the poll. Okay, so what is your preferred direction of energy?
Well, people answer that, Dr. Saggers, just to let you know that there's been a lot of conversation in the chat about what else might influence your personality. So people were asking about, does your personality change with traumatic experiences, or even something like our situation with COVID? And because somebody was saying, I thought personalities were static. Then there were questions about your cultural influences on the impact of that. And then Jerome mentioned that Carl Jung introduced personality types based on astrology and the 4 elements of fire, water, earth, and air. And people were asking about that as well. So a lot of discussion around all that. Thanks.
So I'll just unpackage a couple of things. In terms of personality, there's 2 elements of our personality. There's the part of our personality that we're born with that is innate, but there's also a part of our personality that evolves through life experiences. And we're shaped by our environment. So one of the things in terms of my upbringing, I'm more on the extroverted side, and my 2 parents were more introverted. So they were forcing me to be more introverted than extroverted. So sometimes through culture, cultural appropriate behaviors, we tend to be shaped, or we tend to move. The key thing is once we start realizing who we are, we can adapt, and sometimes going back to our preferences. Yeah, and Carl Jung, in terms of the 4 elements, this is how he started to look at his theory and how did it affect people. So the key thing is that preferences are both innate, but they can be developed. The other thing that we can do is we can use our non-preferences. So extroverts are capable of introversion, but introverts are also capable of extroversion. So if we look at careers and jobs and work, introverts are at a slight disadvantage because the world of work is basically extroverted. So hopefully I've responded to those questions.
Yeah, you did. Thank you so much.
So if we look at the distribution, this is interesting. So we have 1/3 extroverts and we have 2/3 of introverts. So hopefully through the polls, we'll have some quiet times for the introverts to recharge their batteries. Okay, so let's look at the next So let's look at the next scale, which is how do we perceive, how do we gather information, how do we become aware? And it's postulated that we are either have a sensing orientation or an intuitive orientation. The key thing is that we take in data, but sensors tend to forecast futures by the data that they're taking in. So for sensors, it needs to come in through the 5 senses for it to be real. Whereas intuitives, it's more about vision, it's more about inspiration, it's more about hunches. For an intuitive, these are just as real as the data that the sensors are looking at. Sensors tend to like using preferred learned skills, things that they've already mastered, while as intuitives like to add new skills. Sensors tend to focus in on details. Intuitives is more of the big picture. One of the reasons why I had difficulty when I was doing my doctorate, I had to do a lot of sensing. But with me, I was looking more at the big picture and systems. My wife is more on the sensing side, being a registered nurse, and she helped me, going through with my proofreading my dissertation. So S's tend to make few factual errors, whereas intuitives really look at complex systems. N's tend to be more change-oriented. So once again, let's do the next poll. So in terms of sensing intuition, okay, so we've got just a couple more seconds. Okay, so I'll end the polling and we'll view.
Great. I know Janice wanted to see the description between sensing and intuition.
Yeah.
If you can go back to the last slide.
Yeah, I could do that. So just let me, can we move the polling out? Can I just, there we go. I'll click it over.
Yeah, by the way, everybody, your polls, you can move the screen. You can exit. There's an X at the top right. So if you want it out of the way, you can do that at any time.
Okay. So one of the things that we're seeing in this class, more of a preference towards intuition. So about a 1/3, 2/3 split. So in terms of my session for the intuitions, you want to get out of this is how could I use this? What are the possibilities? How could I help navigate my career? And with the sensors, you want to see some specific data, some specific facts. Okay. Good to move on to the next. Oops. So we just looked at how do we take in information, but we also need to make decisions. So we make decisions in one of two ways. Some people have a preference for making decisions through thinking, making their decisions based on logical analysis, but some people have a preference for making their decisions based on human values. So both are effective ways of making decisions, and we actually, when we make rational decisions, we need to factor in both. So thinkers tend to use objective and personal criteria, but feelers will use human values or motives as the criteria. So one's focus is on logic, and feelers want harmony. How do people feel about the decision? So thinkers tend to be impersonal. They'll have spreadsheets. They'll come up with a decision, but Fs will really look at it personally. Interestingly, the thinkers will want to treat people fairly, but Fs really look at individuals. So Fs tend to be more empathetic. They want to look at people uniquely. And the key things, T's tend to be problem solvers, and Fs tend to be people supporters. So let's look at this next poll, see where we're at. Okay, so just a couple more seconds. I think we've been hitting about 92, so. Okay, so we've got 90%, so let's end the polling. Oh, we're up to 92, so let's share the results. So it's interesting to look at this. It's a little bit closer, so we have a 46 versus 54% split. So now let's look at the next slide. And this was an innovation that Catherine Briggs and her daughter added to Jungian work. They said that people have a preference in terms of how do they deal with their external environment, their world. And J's are a little bit different. So if we notice people that are making a lot of judgments, you know, this is good, or how do people feel about this, or people are not happy with this. They're using their decisions, either thinking or feeling outwardly, so you know where they stand, and you could identify based on the decisions that they're making whether they tend to be more thinking or feeling oriented. Whereas the P's are really looking at it from a sensing or intuition. So they perceive outwardly. So they'll ask a lot of questions. And we could identify whether they tend to be more sensing or more intuitive by the types of questions that they ask. So J's want things to be decided, planned, organized, scheduled, whereas P's are continually inquiring, asking questions. P's are very uncomfortable coming to a decision. They resist closure because there may be some more information or data or a possibility they haven't considered out there. Whereas J's want things to be closed. J's want to get things done. You know, checking off their to-do list. You know, this is done, this is done. P's tend to focus on starting things, beginning things, and they might not always complete what it is. So J's tend to be more decisive, making quick decisions, and P's tend to procrastinate or postpone decision making. J's to be more planful, purposeful, whereas P's tend to be more enthusiastic, more spontaneous, more adaptable. So let's look at this poll. Where are we at in terms of the class, in terms of J's and P's? Oh, so we're up to 90. So let's end the polling. Okay, so if we look at here, once again, we're closer. The J's have a slight edge, so 54 versus 46%. Okay, so stop sharing results. So one of the things that I haven't noticed and I haven't discussed, when we do the understanding of the preferences and understanding our types using an instrument, we get something that's called clarity or strength of preferences. One of the things that Myers Briggs said is that even though we have a slight preference, we do have a preference. So our preference can vary from very clear, being very strong, or being slight. So when we look at the difference between extroversion, a person that has a slight extroversion preference is an extrovert, but they'll be demonstrating a lot of introverted behaviors as well. Depending upon the context, they could go back and forth. So what a very clear preference does is it gives you focus. But also when it's very clear, we tend to overuse it and we might be guilty of succumbing to blind spots. You know, we don't see the other side. Whereas weak preferences can provide us flexibility. We'll use it in some situations, but not in all situations. We'll use our non-preference. But the weakness there is we can be indecisive because we see both sides. So if we're slight on the thinking and feeling, we're going to go back and forth. Or if we're slight on the J and the P, we'll go back and forth. The value of slight preferences sometimes in a work environment is that people with slight preferences could actually act as translators. So if you're dealing with somebody who is a strong extrovert with somebody that is a strong introvert, you could mediate between them to get them to communicate better. And as we previously mentioned in the caveats, there's wide variation between personality types. So no two, INFJs are exactly alike, or no two ENTJs are exactly alike. So we need to validate, we need to test our assumptions. So there are 16 different MBTI personality types, and we're going to look at what the distribution in the classes in just a moment. But we had to innovate a little bit because there wasn't enough space to have 16 different answers in the poll. So what we've done is we've divided them up. We'll look at the introverts within the class first to look at what the introverted types are, and then we'll look at the extroverted types. So one of the ways to understand the type table is that the introverts are at the top and the extroverts at the bottom. So the extroverts look externally and the introverts look internally. So let's do the first poll in terms of the eyes. And your type is the combination of your letters from each of the preceding 4 scales. Okay, so can we have the poll? Okay, so let's look at your so only the introverts respond now. Of those that indicated introversion, what is your type?
It seems like we can't answer because you have to press at least one in the introvert and one in the extrovert to submit the answer.
Okay, they should have been set up as 2 separate polls.
They are 2 separate polls. So this one right now.
Okay, so can you do both? Can we do? Okay,
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, good, perfect. So you could answer 2 separate polls. So please answer either. Just select one. Great.
And the one that's up on now is introverts. So only introverts should be asking this. And then we'll put up the introverts. So somebody
Okay.
said ENTJ is missing, for example. Exactly, because only the I's are up right now. So
Okay.
if you start with introvert, you answer this poll. If you are an extrovert, you're going to answer the next poll.
Okay. But what I'm seeing, I'm also seeing people reporting on the E's as well. So apparently they can do both at the same time.
And both of the last option are ENTP. So
Okay.
let's say that the last, well,
The last one is ENTJ.
yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Celine said, Rosalia, scroll, because they're one after the other. That's why.
Yeah.
My apologies. So you see the I's, and then you see question 2.7 right underneath.
Yeah,
E's.
yeah.
Thank you, Celine.
And a lot of people have trouble submitting. So those who can submit, if you want to say how you did it.
Okay, we could do it in the text chat as well. So I've only got 14% voting. So
I think it's just the sheer length of it. So depending on what kind of system you're on, but we're getting answers here.
okay.
Dr. Sagers, would you like me to just read them out?
No. Read what out?
The ones that are in the chat, because the ones that people can't answer. So
Yeah, sure. Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
So let's,
Okay. Laurent said you have to answer both in order to be able to submit. So
Oh.
then it's going to break a little bit the values of
Yeah.
the
Okay.
second one.
So
That's what happens when you combine.
So apologize for that in terms of the polling. What I suggest that you do is, as we go through, make a note on a piece of paper what your preferred type is. Okay, and then what you can do is, if you want, you could post it in the chat, so we'll get a rough estimation. Question that I'm always interested in is, are all types represented within the class, or are there more some types that are more frequent than others? So maybe if you could monitor that, Rosalia.
yeah, I'm going to jot them all down in a quadrant, and then I'll let you know. So
Okay.
It'll just take me a few minutes.
Not a problem. So what we'll do is we'll move on then.
Do you want me to create another poll?
No, I think that's
minutes.
fine. If we do it through the text chat and Rosalia lets us know, that would be fine.
Or can we do like a show of hands, so like we can see it right away? So you can like ask anyone who's like an ISFG, like raise your hand, and then like it'll show up in the chat and see like how many people.
Yeah, the only thing I'm conscious about is how much time that's going to take. And I don't want to take time from questions at the end.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm writing them down. And
Okay.
so just go ahead and move on, and I'll have the answer in a few minutes.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
So what I'm going to do now is,
Okay, well, yeah. Sorry.
okay, so I'm just going to move that from the screen.
Polling.
So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the differences between extroverts and introverts, how it affects work. So if we look at work, extroverts need a lot of variety and action. They need to be involved with people, either talking on the phone or meeting people face to face. Extroverts tend to be impatient with jobs that are long, slow. Sometimes extroverts will act quickly, sometimes without thinking, so extroverts need to be careful while working. Extroverts tend to want to talk rather than writing. Asking extroverts to write a long report is really asking for something special. So when I wrote my dissertation, it basically took me 4 months. So, and that was a very arduous task. But extroverts want to be in an environment where they're learning things new. They're not doing the same thing day in and day out. And also they need to have the opportunity to make decisions by talking it out loud or talking it with someone. Introverts, on the other hand, need quiet time to concentrate. One of my friends is a strong introvert, and her organization moved to an open office concept, and she literally created her own office by stacking file boxes and bookcases. So she was in her own little bubble. Introverts have tough times remembering people's names or faces. Introverts like to work without interruptions. Introverts need time to think before they act. Sometimes, though, they might think and they might come to a decision, but they might not act on it. Introverts, as well, prefer writing to talking. They dislike telephone interruptions. And they learn by reading instead of talking or experiencing. Okay. So now we're going to look at what are the effects of how you gather information, either through sensing or through intuition. So sensors, and as we go through this, check off how many apply to you in terms of what you like out of your work environment. So S's want to be in the moment, working on things that are current. And they like routine. They work steadily, but they need a realistic notion of how long it will take. So step-by-step approaches, not often inspired, but they could be inspired, very careful about their facts, precise work, and they accept life as it is. Whereas intuitives really focus on things in the future, disliking routine, working with enthusiasm, but slack periods in between. Sometimes might leap to conclusions quickly, really want to be inspired, might get their facts a bit wrong, dislike precision work, and asking why things are as they are, wanting to change things. So we could see how people will differ in terms of their work environment. So I'm more of an intuitive. One of my jobs was working in a banking environment, which was highly sensing oriented and highly structured. So I wasn't really a happy camper working in that environment. Our effects of thinking and feeling and how we make decisions. So T's like environments that are logical, that focus in on ideas rather than feelings. They want to be treated fairly. They want others to be treated fairly, but they tend to be firm and tough-minded as well. They can reprimand or fire people when necessary. They may hurt people's feelings, okay? But they do have a talent for problem solving. Whereas S, on the other hand, tend to like harmony. They respond to values as much as their thoughts. They need to be praised. They want others to be praised as well. They see this, tend to be symptomatic and soft-minded. They dislike and avoid and may procrastinate around telling people unpleasant things. They want to please people. And they're really in the person behind the job or the idea. And lastly, in terms of the last scale, in terms of the relation to the environment, either judging or perceiving, J's work best when they can plan their work and follow their plan. So J's need to have a plan. But P's don't mind leaving things to the last minute. So you can see where difficulties may occur with a manager who tends to be J-oriented, an employee might be P-oriented, or vice versa. There could be some possibilities of friction. J's want things settled, finished, but P's adapt well to changing situations. J's may decide too quickly, and P's may procrastinate. J's are happy when decisions are made, and P's feel like they'll never have enough information to make a decision. P's like scheduling, so things get done on time. And P's get a lot done under the pressure of a deadline. So J's use lists as agendas, whereas P's use lists as reminders of things they have to do. So you can see how the different preferences affect work. So we're going to have another poll now. So next poll.
Which poll is that? I think we had 7 polls. So,
Okay, I sent I sent a new one out to. Sorry about that.
no problem.
So if you could just do it very quickly, and people could think about it. To what extent is your current or most recent past job aligned with your work preferences, as indicated by your MBTI type? So to what extent is your current or most recent past job aligned with your work preferences as indicated by your MBTI type? And the 3 questions are high, moderate, or low. So maybe you could just put down the answers, high, moderate, or low. And people will answer that according to their current job or their past immediate job.
Did someone write it in the chat? I'll just copy paste it.
Okay.
Great.
And just to let you know, for those of you that are on the S side, we're 5 minutes ahead of schedule. So we'll have more times for questions at the end.
Yeah. And I'm just calculating now. I'll be there in a second.
Can everybody see my picture? Can you see my webcam?
You see your face and the
Okay.
slides?
Okay, so what I'll do is I'm just putting up a sheet. This is my plan. So I'm more on the J side. So whenever I go into a session, I need a plan. But I'm a slight J, so I'm very adaptable as well. So sometimes I have a plan, but I don't always follow my plan. Okay, so is that poll ready now to go?
Almost. Can you just repeat the question? Make sure. To what extent?
Yeah. To what extent is your current or most recent past job aligned with your work preferences as indicated by your MBTI type? High, moderate, or low?
And I have some answers now, Dr.
Okay.
Tigers.
Okay.
I could tell you that the most common types, and these all have about the same numbers, so 7 or 8, are
Okay.
ENFP,
Okay.
ENFJ,
Yeah.
INFP,
INFP. Yeah.
INTJ.
INTJ.
Those are the ones that have the most. And then the rest are scattered. Some have 1 or 2 or 3,
Okay.
but those are really the dominant ones.
Okay, great. And a quick question: were there any types not represented?
That have absolutely 0? No.
Okay, great.
Great. So it's done. Launching it now.
Perfect. Okay, there we go.
Sorry, I have a problem in understanding how we can identify it as low or medium or high, because some of them are match, some of them are not.
Yeah, and the key thing is you're just making a guesstimate. To what extent do you feel that your preferences were aligned with the job that you were doing. So an example, if you were if you tended to be more of an extrovert, and a lot of your work was done by yourself, then that wouldn't have been very much aligned. So that would be low.
For example, I'm a data scientist.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And it should be more like judgmental and thinking type,
Yeah.
but I'm more feeling and perception type. So an intuition type. This is funny.
Yeah.
But about introversion, yes, it matched. And I was feeling pretty good in the job. I was feeling great. I don't know, I should go based on the way I feel about the job, or is that...
Well, one of the things that you're just describing is that you could adapt the job to to who you are. So a person in that job that would have different preferences than you would do the job differently. So what you're saying to me is that you were satisfied. So you were getting out of the job, what you wanted. So your preferences were being met. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. So it should be high, for example.
Yeah.
And Dr. Saggers, I did a quick recount, and unless somebody tells me otherwise, there are no ESTPs.
Okay.
So if you have that, just enter that into the chat, because I did not see any ESTPs.
Okay. Good.
Maybe because it was analyzing the emotional data, EEG and psychophysiology. That's why I was feeling very good about it.
Yeah, and also in terms of what you were doing, also is aligned with your F, because you're making a contribution, and the contribution that you're making is to people and people's well-being, through your research. Does that make sense?
Yes, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, so one of the things, if in terms of the scoring, and we've got 82%, so I'll just end the polling and share the results. So if you scored high and you felt that they're good alignment, your job is well matched to your personality. It's a source of satisfaction. You're going to be engaged. If it's moderate, then it may vary depending upon your task or activities. So from a personal example, I was working for a large consulting firm, and I was with the consulting firm for 12 years. And my boss had a sixth sense. When he felt that I was getting bored or stale and I was disengaged because I was doing the same thing day in and day out, all of a sudden he came up with a new task or a special project. And all of a sudden my motivation shot up again. So what the key thing is you really need to do is you need to consciously leverage your preference and ask yourself the questions: how can I adapt my job to make use of my preferences? Because preferences are talents, they're strengths, if we learn to develop them. If it's on the low side, you could look at can you re-engineer your job to make it more appealing to who you are? Or you might want to transfer into another department within the organization that you work with that might respond more to your preferences. Or alternatively, you might want to start looking for a new job. And we'll talk about those things later. Great, so I'll close that. So I'm going to share a model with you, and this comes from Hammer, a good little booklet, is Introduction to Type and Careers, and I give you the source later in the presentation. Basically, you need to say, well, where are you, and where is it that you want to go? So we need to ask that question. Key thing about this model is that it's cyclical. Because where we go from where we are to where we want to go, when we get there, now we're back to where are we, and where do we want to go? So it evolves, it changes. The career exploration and development process looks at, we need to gather information not only about ourselves but about different organizations, different employers, what the market is. We need to make decisions. How are we going to focus our developmental efforts? We need to set goals for ourselves, and then what do we need to do in order to prepare ourselves? So looking at developmental activities, but we also need to make contact with others to let people know what it is that we're doing, so that they could let us know when opportunities come up. A quick question for everyone. When you look at these things, gathering information, making decisions, setting goals, developing activities, and making contact, what linkages can you make with the Myers Briggs? So you could either use the text chat, or if you're brave enough and you want to use the mic, please do. So once again, the question is, what parallels or what alignments can you see in terms of exploration and development linking to the Myers Briggs and the different preferences? So Rosalia, do you see anything in the text chat, or anybody want?
We
Okay.
have so far integration of all functions, higher position. When I plan, I have to be realistic. Being more extroverted to build your network, extroverted activities, integration of all functions. Really depends on career choices, says someone. Another realistic. Perceiving will gather information for a long time.
Yeah, good. So you can see how useful the Myers-Briggs is to help you through the exploration and development process. And the key thing is that you need to make use of your preferences as well as your non-preferences. So for example, gathering information, for those of you that are sensors, you also need to look at what are you missing? What information haven't you got that you need? So looking more at the big picture. While if you're intuitives, you need to balance your inspiration and your big picture with what the data is saying. So you need to use sensing. So basically you need to use both. And the key thing is as you go through, you really need to use both your preferences as well as your non-preferences to get a more balanced view or a balanced picture. Okay. So if you come to the conclusion that you're not happy with where you are, what are some of the things that you could do? So you could alter your job. So coming up with a special role that you could use your preferences, or volunteering for tasks more consistent with your preferences. Depending upon your relationship with your boss, one technique that's very useful is find out what your boss doesn't enjoy. You might enjoy it, so your boss might be able to delegate that, that specific job to you. You could adapt to your job, communicating with others whose preferences are different in ways that they prefer. So learning to adapt using your non-preferences to deal with specific situations or specific people. Use your MBTI preferences to increase your understanding and requirements. And then more importantly, adopting these behaviors when you can. one of the things, and some of you may be familiar with a concept called design thinking. And in design thinking, one of the first steps that we use is empathize. So try to understand your organization or your boss or different people in different departments, finding out what their pain points are, empathizing with them, trying to understand them, and then saying, well, based on my preferences, how could I meet your needs? How could I apply what I'm good at to helping you meet your needs? Okay. All too often we feel trapped, but we recognize that we can alter or adapt the situation. Or lastly, if you feel that that doesn't work, and it also depends upon how you feel about your organization. Do you want to stay with the organization or not? So you can change your job. Identify departments that might be more aligned with what you enjoy, what you want to do. Look for transfers. Or lastly, if you're not happy with the organizational context, then conduct an external job search. So, a series of questions to ask yourselves if you're ready for a job change or not. You know, if you wake up in the morning and you're not looking forward to going to work, well, that tells you something. If you feel that you're just chasing your pension, you're just there for your salary, and you're not energized, that tells you something. You don't have the opportunity to use your talents. The Gallup organization has a question they use to gauge employee engagement. It's called the Q12. And one of the questions is, do you have the opportunity to use your talent every day? If you feel that you're being belittled, your contribution is not appreciated or respected, you avoid discussing what you do with friends. You don't tell them who you work with or what you do. You avoid these discussions. You don't like or respect those with whom you work. For me, a big one is you're not learning anything new. If you're not learning anything new, you're stagnating. The world is moving ahead, so we need to be in a continual learning mode. And if you feel pessimistic about your future, it's time to look at other opportunities that you could be optimistic about. So I'm not going to poll you, but look at these questions. You could jot the slide, put it up on your I wouldn't say put it on your bulletin board at work, but on your mirror at home. And if you start feeling that you're answering, a lot of these questions, then it might be time to look at different things. So I'm gonna.
Sorry, a lot of comments about people saying they have either felt that way or feel that way, and how awful that is.
Yeah, and use that. I would say to people, use that as a thermometer. Taking gauge and so it's actually calling you to action, because if you stay in a situation where a lot of these things are happening, it's going to affect you. It's going to affect you psychologically. So it's you need to control and start taking some action, and even taking the action itself will help you. You won't feel like you're a victim. So I'm going to end off with the MBTI and career job search, and look at some of the strengths and pitfalls of each. So if you look at on the E and I scale, so the extrovert, they have a large network. You could tell extroverts by how many people they have on their LinkedIn. They're pretty good at using verbal skills. They tend to be confident and outgoing, which is good, but guess what? They might talk too much. I've known some job candidates in the past that have actually talked themselves out of jobs. I've known salespeople that have talked themselves out of contracts. They may not listen enough, and they may mistake doing a lot of things with actually getting things done. Whereas on the introverts, very effective, very precise, very pleasing CVs, very thoughtful and very careful. And they focus on what's important. Okay. Pitfalls, they may think too much. Sometimes they may overthink things. And because a lot of the excitement is happening internally, they may appear unenergetic. And they may not develop or use their network. So eyes need to, especially with a career or job search, make people aware. Obviously, you need to do it carefully so that your employer might not become aware of it. On the S and the S, so S's have a very good, accurate self-representation of who they are and what they do well. Whereas N's may be overly optimistic. They see the big picture. They don't see their flaws or their limitations or weaknesses. S's are thorough and systematic. They're realistic, but the intuitives are open to novel job opportunities. You know, they tend to think out of the box, and they are also useful in finding resources. Pitfalls. As an S, you might be reluctant to try something new. You may be comfortable, and as a result, might not want to make a change. In interviews, S's have difficulty with questions that are open-ended. You know, tell me about what you're looking for in a new manager. You know, that's a difficult question for S's because they have to think about it. They have to use the big, so it's good to prepare yourselves for these questions ahead of time. Sometimes S's interpret job requirements too literally, and then once they're in the job, they find out that the job is not really what they expected. Pitfalls for intuitives, because they see the big picture, they don't focus, they may procrastinate, and they might have difficult answering specific factual database questions. So once again, they need to prepare for that. And it might overlook the important things about the job requirements. So personal example, after 12 years in consulting, I was looking for a change. Through one of my past colleagues, I got an opportunity to work in a banking environment. The job description was really interesting. What the bank wanted to do was really interesting, but that really blurred me to the realities of working in a bank. So highly structured. I like structure, but I'm a sort of a slight J. And so I like spontaneity, I like adaptability. So there were a lot of things that really, so I was only at the bank for 1.5 years and then decided to go back into consulting. So T's and the F's. So T's, the strength is you'll have a job search strategy. You got objective criteria for what you're looking. You tend to be well organized. With the F's, values oriented. So you need to be careful that the organizations that you work with are really attuned to your values. Okay, personable and pleasant. Ability to understand the organizational climate. Okay. Pitfalls of the T's, not taking own feelings into account. You need to recognize that you have feelings, that you have values, so you need to factor them in when making decisions. So an example, one of my jobs working in the insurance industry, and it was my first job after graduating, and I realized that the values of the insurance company were different than my own values. Not that they were bad, but their values just weren't my values. So T's might not weigh the impact of making decisions on others. T's may over-rationalize. Pitfalls for the Fs, overly concerned with pleasing others. Tip that I always gave my daughters is that you could please some of the people some of the time, but you can't please all of the people all of the time. And if you try to do that, you're going to set yourself up for conflict and for failure. Might take job rejections personally. And the key thing is you need to also reject potential employers as well, based on what your values are. Fs may tend to reveal too much personal information. So always the tip that I says, don't reveal unless you're asked. If they ask you things, then you don't respond to the question. And lastly, in terms of the J's and the P's, so in terms of the job search, J's will be organized, systematic, step-by-step job search process. On top of things, they'll have materials and resources, whereas the P's, ability to see options and opportunities. More outcomes in terms of flexibility. So one of the tips that I give people when they're looking for new careers is looking at sometimes possibilities, looking at as job, especially in an organization that you want to work with, as a stepping stone to something that's going to be of more interest to you. P's also have the capacity to change plans. One of the things that we're becoming aware of is the world is changing so quickly, and jobs that exist today didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago. And same thing from, 5, 10 years from now. Jobs are continually being created. And on the pitfall side, J's might tend to decide too soon. So depending upon where you are in your career phase, take the time to investigate, explore. You can make U-turns. J's might become impatient with the process. I've been looking for a new job now for 6 months or 7 months. When is this going to end? So it took me a year to get my first job in HR. So persevere. It will happen. And also sometimes being too rigid about your career goals or plans. Whereas the P's might have difficulty making decisions, might spend too much time gathering information and data, and not having realistic timelines.
Sorry, Dr. Sackers, there was a request to go back to the EI slide.
Yeah, okay, here we go. Yeah, so the question is, or did somebody just want to see it?
They just wanted a quick look again at the pitfalls.
Okay.
And the strengths, yeah.
Okay. And if I understand correctly as well, Rosalia, they'll be able to look at the slides again when they review the recording.
Yes, they can review the recording. We could also send them. I think we'll send them the presentation. That'll be easier, so they don't have to scroll through. But the presentation is live on Facebook. Naya, would you mind putting the Facebook link? If you want to review this presentation again, you can do so at any time. It's on our CATS Facebook page, so that way you can pause it. At the places you want to see again. So it's a good way of looking at it. So some of our sessions are there, and this one, which is live now, will be there. So please go ahead and do that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rosalia. So glad to say that we're on time, and we're going to have a full 30 minutes for Q&A. And also, I'm prepared to stay on a little bit longer if there are additional questions. So just to summarize what we looked at, I've given you a rationale for a personality-based approach. That doesn't negate looking at your aptitudes, your interest, your values, but factor in who you are from a personality standpoint when you're looking at career planning and development. Gave you some standard definitions of each of those terms. We looked at the career phrases and how to navigate, recognizing that you while it is hierarchical, you can go back. So you can start a new career, at the end of your career. And even while you're working, you could find other outlets to use your talents and your preferences. So one of the things that I mentioned was volunteering. The other thing that we looked at your preferences, you identified your MBTI type and looked at their impact at work. And then I gave you a model for career planning and development and hopefully offered some tips to adapt or change jobs based on your MBTI preferences. And here's some additional resources. A standard for job search is what color is your parachute. Highly recommended. I first used it back in the early to mid 70s. So this thing was first published in 1970. Hammer is a useful little booklet, and in the booklet as well, it looks at each of the types, and what it does is it gives you information on career trends. What are the most attractive occupations? What are your potential strengths, obstacles? And it gives you some tips as well. You could purchase this through the website psychometrics.com. Hirsch and Kumaro, and it was interesting. Jean Kumaro, I received my certification from her for doing the MBTI in 1991. So a great little book, Life Types, and it goes into not only careers but relationships as well. If you're interested in the Myers Briggs and the story, Gifts Differing is a great book. And it offers some career development suggestions as well. A great book by Tiger Barron and Tiger, Do What You Are, Discovering the Perfect Career. So it really looks at each of the MBTI types. So, and it gives you real life examples as well. So highly recommended. A website you can do a free MBTI type assessment, and it gives you information on each of the types as well. Psychometrics.com is, I use it. I have, when I do work with clients and I get people to do their MBTIs, I do it all online. So I use Psychometrics. They have a lot of resources as well. One of the resources that I use when I'm working with people in career development is that they have a little booklet called Type. There's a apart from Hammer's book, they also have a report. So when you do the MBTI, it really gives you information specifically to job search and career planning, specific to your own type. So you get a report on a career report. One of the, I guess, disadvantages of teaching and doing public seminars and online seminars is, as an instructor, a facilitator, my goal is to help you, to be of help. And I don't always get the feedback. So I want to end off by giving you a personal challenge, reflecting on what you've learned today, what you've seen. Go back and maybe revisit it. But as a result of that, commit to applying at least one thing that you learned. I don't want to make it too onerous for you. So just one thing. And then contact me either at my McGill email address or at my company email address, just to let me know what happened. And I'll be pleased to answer any questions that you might have as well, beyond the Q&A period today. So time for some questions, and guess what? It's 11:32, so I'm only 2 minutes off.
We probably
So
started 2
questions?
minutes over, so you're probably exactly right on time.
Thanks, Rosalia. So,
Okay, first, just to let you know, there's people thanking you for the session and saying they found it informative. One question that came up, and then we'll get to as many questions as we can, everyone, Nayo, just put up your LinkedIn as well, so people can connect with you that way.
Yeah, sure.
Apologies. There was a question about a study that came out that showed that women don't apply to jobs unless they feel they have 100% or close to that of the skills, whereas men, I forgot the number for men, but it was far lower. Do you have any comments on that and how that obviously might affect your dissatisfaction at work?
Yeah, and I don't know that specific research, but one of the things that I found when I did my doctoral dissertation was that women generally tended to be more flexible in their leadership styles than men, but they changed after from the pre to the post situation. It was almost as if the course gave them the permission to do what came naturally, let's say naturally to them. So, and also it's on the S and the N spectrum. So if it's a woman that tends to have an S preference, she will tend to be more really focused. Do I really meet all of the job requirements? Where it could be even a woman or a man on the N preference, looking at the big possibilities. So not getting down into the specific details, but looking at the overall job and still applying because they feel that there's a possibility. So it's probably a combination of both. And I would say for whether you're a man or a woman, if you think the job is of interest, the organization of his interest, apply. You know, you've got nothing to lose.
Yeah, and we at CATS, we encounter that all the time. Well, I only have this number of the skills, or this, or they ask for French is a really good example, but sometimes it won't say the proficiency level, and some people have a good proficiency level and think it's not enough. You have nothing to lose by, absolutely nothing to lose by applying. So we encourage that strongly, of course. My apologies.
You know, and the other thing is to get a job interview so that you could really promote your talents, and then once you're on the job, then you could develop new skills. So based on my years of experience, there's no such thing as an ideal organization or job or an ideal candidate as well. You know, there's varying degrees.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question that came in from Facebook, actually. Yeah. How difficult would it be to pursue a career that involves personality traits that you don't have by nature?
Well, I guess the key thing is there's a difference between personality preferences and traits. So from a traits perspective, these are innate. So if you're doing continually things that you don't have the personality trait or the aptitude, you're continually forcing yourself. So it's going to be hard. Okay. Now, from a preference viewpoint, what you can do is you could be in a job where the majority of people have different preference than you. But what you'll do is you'll benefit because you'll be doing that job differently. You'll be adding value based on your preferences. One of the sources in a career counseling library, there's something called the MBTI atlases or classifications of occupations. And you can really go into that and you can see your type, what are the most prevalent occupations. But you'll see that at the bottom, there'll be small percentage of people that will still do that occupation, but they'll do it well, they'll do it differently. One of my colleagues in the US has recently written a book on the 8 best presidents. And one of the things that he discovered of the 8 best presidents, and that each of them had a different personality type. So while they were all perceived as great, they handled the presidency differently. They brought different talents to the presidency. So I hope I answered that question.
Perfect. I have a question on hiring because would you use, so we talked a lot about what you can do in your own job, but when you're hiring, do you suggest, if you're the hiring manager, looking at what you have based on something like MBTI and then hiring the opposite or making a team that's balanced based on these?
Okay, so I wouldn't use and I wouldn't recommend using the MBTI as a selection instrument. One of the reasons is it's a self-reporting instrument, and sometimes people might tell you as an employer what you want to hear rather than who they are. If you're an employer, what I would suggest asking questions. You know, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What type of manager would you like to look for? What are you looking for in a manager? Tell me about the best manager that you've worked with. You know, why was this the best manager? You know, how did the two of you work together? Then when the person is hired, I recommend using the MBTI as a orientation instrument. So you and your manager could sit down. If your manager is going through the MBTI, how are you similar? How are you different? How are you going to work together?
Excellent, thank you. And Laura asks, how do you create tasks for yourself that are interesting in your job if your boss is very resistant to change or very resistant to that very notion?
Yeah, then you deal with how do you change your boss, and there's different ways you could try to influence your boss. You could try to find out from your boss what does he enjoy doing, what doesn't he enjoy doing, and sometimes that might be an edge in, or you could ask your boss as well for for specific tasks, or you might want to volunteer. I've noticed this. Is this something that I could look at? Some bosses are easier to deal with others. One of the things that I always recommend when you're starting off working with a new boss, meeting with that new boss and setting rules of engagement. So as an employee, what are you looking for from your manager? And you could even do that during the pre-employment interviewing stage, but also getting your boss to say, what is he looking or what is she looking for in an employee? How are we going to work together? You know, so setting expectations on both sides. And it's always easier to scope it out and identify the context prior to accepting a job. Doing your homework as well. If there is a boss who is very doesn't like to change, very reticent, doesn't want to share, then you need to ask yourself, is this the boss that you want to work with? So maybe looking for opportunities within the organization, or sometimes saying, this is not really working. I'm going to start looking for another job and working for another employer. And then when you're interviewing, ask questions. Try to guesstimate what your prospective manager's MBTI type is. I hope that helps.
Thank you. And I just wanted, you mentioned in one of the slides, it was in one of the weaknesses versus strengths of the types, that you can volunteer to do other things. And from personal experience, I was in a job that felt just completely stuck, and I was stuck there for a variety of reasons. So I started volunteering, doing things I like to do, and that led to so many things, and at the same time kept the fact that I was really dissatisfied at work, but had this other thing that kept me very satisfied. So just like in case you're thinking about that from personal experience, that that definitely works. So now I know you've all have other questions, but in case there's any of you who actually want to speak up and rather speak up than write it down, now's your time. So just you can just start talking, and if that leads to chaos, I'll step in, but I don't think it should. So does anybody want to ask their question out loud?
Sure. Hi, Bob.
Hi.
Question is, do you recommend we redo the MBTI evaluation every once in a while? Could it be different 5 years later or 10 years later?
Yeah, I would recommend that. And I would say the rule of thumb is 2 to 3 years, or if there's been some changes, change in job, change in lifestyle sometime, And what you'll see in different reiterations of the MBTI is that what will change is the slight preferences. The very clear or strong preferences won't change. So an example in terms of me, I'm more of an I'm a strong extrovert. And when I go on business trips, I always ask my wife, how well was it while I was away? And she says that it was quiet. So I'm not going to be an introvert, okay? But I'm slight on the J and the P. So in some situations I'll be more P, in some situations I'll be more J. So that might be picked up in different iterations of the, different iterations of doing the Myers Briggs.
Thanks.
But it's also influenced, as I mentioned, by the job you're in or by the context. So there might be some changes, but it'll be on the slight side. And what I always say is help people to try to develop using their non-preferred side. Carl Jung once said is that the first half of your life, or you talk about the first half of your career, it's really developing what comes naturally to you. And in the second half, it's developing your non-preferences.
Thank you. And thank you, Sandra, for your question. Would anybody else like to speak up and ask a question? Now's your time. If not, I'll go back to the questions that we've already had.
I have a question. I'm going to share my video. I am outside.
Okay, that's fine.
So I think my biggest challenge currently is that the team that I work with, our personality types are misaligned.
Mm-hmm.
I'm being polite.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any suggestions on how to sort of navigate that? Like if you're really an introvert, but the majority are extroverts, it causes a lot of miscommunication.
Mm-hmm.
And like if you like, I will ask for different tasks, like you said, change things up. I've been in a very lucky position that every year it seems like I get a special project, which is probably why I rate myself high in work, but I would say low when it comes to the team atmosphere.
Yeah, one of the things that I use, and I've been doing it quite regularly, is with clients. It could be at a departmental level. Is actually using the Myers Briggs as a team building activity. One of the advantages of the Myers Briggs is that it's very non-threatening. So it starts off with the premise is that we all have preferences, and those preferences, we use them, we develop them, they become talents. But people are different, and as a result of our different preferences, sometimes that might cause a friction. So one of the things that's interesting is when people do that, one of the things, when they get the results, they all start sharing the results. Oh, I didn't know this, and people make sometimes false assumptions. Oh, I didn't know that you were this or you were that. So it gets them to talk about it. And as a result, moving forward, how can we learn to work together? Because Carl Jung also said is what frustrates you about others tells you more about who you are than who the other person is. So understanding that other person, where they're coming from, it's not that they're trying to be difficult, but they're really adding to you. So an example, I'm the end of the family. My wife and I are complete opposites. So she's the censor. So I come up with a great idea, and then my wife asks me some questions. Have you really thought this through, Bob? And have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? So she's, that's irritating sometimes, but I've learned to appreciate that, because she allows me to look at it more deeply, and it prevents me from making a bad error in judgment. Does that help?
Yes, I mean, it does help. We've done the exercise. So we know what our personality
Yeah, yeah.
types are. I feel like we're stuck in like the storming stage.
Okay, so follow-up thing there, and make a point of yourself. So you know everybody's type. Talk to them on a one-on-one basis, based on our preferences. How do you like me to communicate with you? So getting them to, and then following up after a month after the discussion, saying, am I communicating with you better now? Is it easier to work with me now? So actually applying it. And you don't have to do that to everybody on the team, but there may be some people that are
Okay,
more
I'm working on
problematic.
it.
Okay, great. So in terms of my personal challenge
you.
to you, that might be something for you to work on.
Oh,
Thank you for your question.
I'm working on it. Don't worry, Dr. Bob.
That's great.
Thank you.
And now, actually, Dr. Bob, we know you're an E, so an extrovert, as you mentioned it, and an N, and actually, Janice would love to know, what is your type?
Okay, it's an ENTJ, but a lot of people think I'm a clause F. You know, because when they see me in a teaching or a consulting role, you know, I tend to be very focused on the students and also focused on my clients as well. But when I'm, you know, when I'm working in my dissertation was a quantitative study, so you know, using spreadsheets, doing force field analysis, pluses and minuses, you know, that's basically how I tend to make decisions. But sometimes, you know, there is a part of me that make decisions based on values as well. As I mentioned, when I worked in the insurance company or when I worked in the bank, you know, the values, my values and their different values, you know, were different. So.
Excellent. And actually, Jennifer guessed what you are right after I asked her question, and she guessed correctly. So bravo, Jennifer. Rashta wanted to ask a question. Rashta, do you want to answer it, ask it on camera?
Yes, please. I just because I've been diagnosed as being introvert. So I've been very quiet and this kind of stuff. But in your list, it's saying for thinker. And talking actually very like organized and with like strategically. But I don't have that talent, to be honest with you. If one thing in introvert is great is being able to do that, but I'm more after thinker. So some of the things like this or think internal simulation. No, I depend, I can say, to external stimulation. How it works?
So the key thing, think of it as a preference. So if you have a preference for writing with your right hand, okay. Now let's say this right hand was injured. You can't write with it. You could start writing with your left hand, and over a while it will probably never be as good as your right, you could probably make out. So the key thing is that it's not all or nothing. So we can be an extrovert, but we can have introverted tendencies as well. So one of the things is, as at the end, when you go through the slides, put a check mark beside what is you and what is not you, and then you probably see that you're a little bit of both. So you could probably have a slight preference. That means that you could go back and forth depending upon the situation. So you could be a forward thinker as part of the extrovert, but but then you recognize that maybe I need to be more of an after thinker. I need to basically, before I say something, I need to take that pause before I say something. You know, and we've all been in that situations where we've said something and we say, why did I say that?
That's one of the reasons I truly avoid any work that requires being politically correct, like business and marketing and this sort of stuff. I'm just running away. It's just not me. I kind of in trap of everyday thinking, what did I say, how it's gonna affect, and catastrophizing it. But that was very helpful. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Rashday. And we had a few questions about how can you use the MBTI if you're running your own business or want to run your own business or working for yourself freelancing.
Yeah, you could. Well, one of the things that I use running my own business is when I'm team building. I use it with clients, so I understand them. I understand what their preferences are. How could I bring about interventions that are going to be supportive to them? One of the things working with others as well is if they've been through the MBTI, we share types. So we know what our relative strengths and weaknesses are. How are we going to work together? Depending upon the size of your company, use the MBTI, as I mentioned, as a team builder. It helps sometimes to have it facilitated, but you don't really need to have a facilitation, if you understand the concepts and you just have a discussion. Does that help?
There were 2 or 3 questions about that,
okay.
so
Okay.
I think you answered that question. So, and thank you for all the questions, by the way, everyone. We had a question from Maya. She wanted to know, what do you think about the ocean? I don't know if OCEAN.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. It's an instrument that's based on the Hogan personality. What they refer to as the big, they refer to as the big 5. So that's other instrument that you could use. I'm a big believer on not restricting my practice to only one instrument. I find the Myers Briggs useful, but I use other instruments as well. So I use Hogan with one client. I use the Fire OB with another client. There's something called DISC that I use as well. One of the things is that all of these instruments are looking at the same thing, but through different perspectives and through different lenses. So one of the things that I learned from my studies is doing triangulation. So if you do 4 or 5 instruments and they're all telling you the same thing, well, guess what? You've got a good answer. Because they complement each other.
So it helps you confirm.
Yeah, they help you confirm and validate.
Wonderful, thank you. And actually, on a bit of a related question, somebody asked, because you can do MBTI, free MBTI type tests online. Are these accurate? Would you recommend any in particular?
Well, the 16 personalities website that I posted, you could do that and they have information. So I would say that's a good one. I always recommend for people to do the validated instruments. There is a price attached to that though, but it's really useful to do it and then to sit down with somebody to walk you through it. And it gives you more specific input, in terms of your specific type. But the 16 personalities, definitely, I recommend that as a website. And it's also in French as well. So I didn't post the French website. So Google it and you'll be able to find it.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. So I know people want to obviously, and you mentioned other resources. I know people seem really interested in this. So in the slides, if you go back on Facebook, and we will also send you the slides, you'll see the resources that Dr. Sagers put up. One person asked, how do you balance speaking up and being an ISFJ?
Okay. Well, one of the things that I recommend, especially to introverts, to prepare ahead of time. So if you're in a meeting and you want to bring up a point, for those that I see Sandra's picture there. Hi, Sandra. So I see some former students, and one of the things that I like doing is journaling. Getting people to keep a journal. It's great for introverts. So just journal. What point do you want to make? Write it down. So when you prepare it ahead of time, you're in more control. Your comfort level is higher. One of the things is as a introvert, sometimes you might need to be a little bit assertive. I don't say aggressive, but assertive, letting people know that you have something to say. Because if you don't, what will happen is the conversation will move on. And now the group is talking about something else and you've lost your point or your opportunity. So prepare ahead of time. When introverts do this, they're capable of extroverting. A study years ago showed that students in class, introverted students were at a disadvantage. So when the teacher asked the question, who were the first hands to go up in the class? The extroverts. And when the teacher waited 5 seconds, more and more of the introverts, they thought about the question, they formulated their answer. The other thing I recommend to introverts is that when you're in a meeting and somebody says something and it's a point that you want to raise, just jot it down on a notepad. So just writing it down will help you. So it's easier when you're referring to notes in terms of talking.
Thank you. And Jerome had a question. Oh, I'm so sorry you weren't finished. My apologies.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you're leading a meeting, extroverts tend to dominate meetings. So if you're leading the meeting, call upon introverts, give them the opportunity, the permission to speak, because sometimes they're looking for the permission to speak.
Ironically, this extrovert interrupted to ask that, so yes, duly noted. There's a question from Jerome, and I've heard this as well too, that some people say the MBTI, or it's been said it's either outdated or not accurate, or do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, the thing I like about the MBTI is that it is supported through the Association for Psychological Type, so there's ongoing research. So people are still using it. But like any instrument that's self-reporting, it's open to manipulation, and it really depends upon the people completing it. The type of reporting and the instruments that they've used, they've been updated over the years. So they're using it. The last 15 years, they've been using a different testing methodology. So the accuracy goes up to about 80–85%. Now, like everything else, I always tell people, you're the best judge. If you read the report, you say, this is not you, well, guess what? It's not you. So it's a tool to help people to become more self-aware, but it's a tool, it's an instrument. So when people say it's a test, it's not really measuring anything. It indicates something. And it's up to you to say, this is what it's indicating to me, and I agree with it, and as a result of that, I'm going to change my behavior accordingly.
Thank you very much. And actually
so I see another familiar face. Hi, Paul.
Paul, you can go ahead and say hi if you'd like. Okay, so thank you. And I'm actually, Dr. Saggers agreed to stay on longer, which is absolutely generous on his part for more questions. But I did want to say goodbye to those people who had to sign off right now. It is noon. I thank you so much for being here today, for taking part of your Saturday. I congratulate you for, again, investing in yourself and taking this time to dedicate to self-development. Thank you so much. We look forward to your feedback. You can continue this conversation actually on Facebook. So if you have more questions and you're leaving now and you didn't get a chance to ask them, go ahead and put them up on the Facebook. And I just wanted to thank Dr. Saggers, even though we're going to continue here for a bit. I think the fact that he even gave his email address to say, tell me what you've changed, is a testament to his generosity with time and with his expertise. He's a wonderful resource. We're so thankful. And do go ahead and do that and email him. I'm sure he'll give you, he'll be happy to hear about that, obviously, and might give you some wonderful counsel. So again, thank you, everybody. We'll stay on a little bit. There's a lot of thank yous, Dr. Saggers, by the way, in the chat, saying it was helpful, insightful, and many more compliments.
So I'm just going through the images. A special call out to Patrick. It's been a while since we saw each other. I emailed your mom recently, so nice to see you participating.
Many years, yes.
Yeah, many years.
Thank you.
Oh, and that's funny because Paul has been at many of our sessions, so he's actually a familiar face to Cats as well. Paul, it was nice seeing you at a lot of our sessions over the week.
And I see.
I keep doing things until I get them right.
Yeah.
And
coming
Paul
to this session was one of the right things to do. Bob and I go back years, and we're almost neighbors actually as well.
Yeah. Oh, amazing.
Bob, I'll look for you at Baskin Robbins for an ice cream soon.
That'd be super. We'll have to keep our distance. and I see Mel's face there. Hi, Mel. And see anybody else there? I'm seeing. Yeah, it's nice to see some familiar faces.
Yeah, there might have been more because we were up to almost 80 people, but sometimes people leave during questions or because they have to log off. So there might have been other people that you know here before. So thank you for deciding to stay on a little more and answer some more questions. In this case, then I'm going to open it up to anyone who has a burning question and would like it answered before we have to log off. Anybody want to speak up with that or write it in the chat right now? And while that's happening, I'll ask Dr. Sagers, do you have any questions for the audience?
Other than feedback on the session, was it clear? Especially for those of you that had been through the MBTI before, did it add anything? Did it give you a new perspective? I know Paul does a lot of work in career planning and career consulting as well. And anything that struck you of particular interest, Paul?
I did an online MBTI prior to attending the session, which confirmed what I hoped it would confirm, quite frankly. And no, I appreciated the way you walked all of us through, each of us, helping explain and not feeling the need to justify or defend where we are. And that can be difficult in a job interview because the interviewer may themselves be very different from what the job really is going to entail once the person is hired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that I always suggested people when they're both in terms of employers and candidates is try to get a realistic job preview, because no job is ideal. You know, what are the good things about this job, but what are the down points? And it's almost like a immunization or a vaccination. If you hear about some of the bad things before and you get into it, well, you know, it's something that you know that you could work around. And Paul is so true. People don't have to be defensive about their preferences. Sometimes people will go, I want it to be this, or I don't want to be this, you know, and the key thing is really look at, you know, how you add value and how can you turn these things into talents. And especially with those slate preferences, you could use those to help people. Because sometimes in a team, you'll get two people extremes and they'll be arguing and you could help them sort out the differences.
Great. And Kayla had a question. To people under the age of 18, do you suggest that they do the test? Is it helpful at that point?
Yeah, because the MBTI is using words, people have to have literacy. So both from the age of, I would say, adolescence, they could start as early as 10, 11, so early adolescence. There's an instrument that they developed for children called the Murphy-Meisinger, I think. So it's the first name is Murphy. I forget the second name. So, but what they've done is they've done it for children. And when my kids were young, I actually did it, and it's amazing how accurate it was. You know, because both my daughters are different. One daughter knew from an early age what she wanted to do in her life, and the other daughter, it took her a while to really decide on her career. So,
Dr. Sagers.
Yeah.
I did know quite a bit about this subject. In an amateurish way, I sort of feel like I'm a expert on Jungian psychology after many years of study. But what I especially really appreciated is reading the strengths and the pitfalls of each of these functions and attitudes. I think that was very pertinent, and I thank you for that information, and your overall presentation was wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Jerome, are you familiar with, in terms of the MBTI, and obviously shortage of time can't go into everything, but one of the things is that people can develop their type.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, so
If I can share a personal
yeah,
experience,
go ahead.
I would say that I went through perhaps at least one nervous breakdown in order to develop another aspect of my personality. It's kind of hard to get into details, and I don't really want to, but sometimes we can get so fixated on one particular function, for example, thinking, that we don't, I mean, there are personality types who are really very much of only one function type. Like they're totally thinking or totally sensing or totally intuitive or totally feeling. And, you know, sometimes developing that balance in a person's life may not be sort of like just a gradual process. I actually think that some people may go through nervous breakdowns, you know, to actually express what is being held back in their subconscious. And, you know, then they don't know who the hell they are and where they're going and what they're all about. But, you know, they eventually figure it out. I don't know if you have a comment on that, but.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And I mentioned it earlier on, is sometimes parents, even though they may be well-intentioned, they may try to force a child into their preferences rather than the child's preferences.
Absolutely.
So personally, yeah, go ahead.
And Young got into that whole discussion of nature versus nurture. And, you know, he was of the opinion that, you know, we have, our personality is pretty much identified even as we're born. It's not to say that we can't change it or modify it, but if parents try to work against that natural tendency in the children, it can be detrimental. And at a certain point in life, the child, you know, needs to figure out who they were meant to be at the beginning. Yeah, am I being accurate about this?
Yes, and a quick story. My wife and I have a friend. His parents were both scientists, and they really pushed him into science. So he got his PhD, worked for a large pharma company, and he was just not happy.
No. Yeah.
And so he finally decided to go back to what he wanted to do, and he ran a retail store. And then he became the mayor of his municipality. So he finally discovered himself. You know, and sometimes these things happen. Just to add to what Jerome was saying, and thanks for sharing your story. The functions are very important. Within the Myers-Briggs, the functions are how you gather information, how you make decisions. So the S and the N and the T and the F. And depending upon your type, there's a hierarchy. So there's a dominant, an auxiliary, all the way down to the inferior function. So you start developing your dominant first, but you need to develop the other ones in order to get a more complete picture. So when I'm working with people in terms of career counseling, I go into more in depth in terms of how to develop specifically, and how could they be mindful that they don't hijack themselves by just focusing in on what their dominant is.
Can I make one more comment?
Yeah,
I don't
sure.
want to. So anyways, there is something called the tarot cards.
Okay.
And card 21 of the tarot, which is called the world, what it is represented by is kind of like a hermaphroditic figure in the middle of a wreath, dancing easily between the four fixed functions of the zodiac, which is earth, fire, air, and water. And the idea there, the representation of the world, is that we are able to sort of move equally well between these four different functions without any barriers or obstacles. It's an interesting...
And the extent to which we're able to do that is the extent to which we've been able to develop them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes developing them really means putting ourselves into situations which are totally antithetical to who we are.
Yeah, and you need to be vulnerable.
Oh, absolutely.
So when you're learning to use something that's not natural to you. You're moving out of your comfort zone. Good.
Absolutely.
Thanks for
So
sharing.
Thank you very much. I'm going to re-mic myself and stop my video because I don't want this to be about me.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
sharing. Thanks for the
Thank
questions.
you. Okay.
Thank you, Jerome. We'll go with one last question. Now's the time if you want to ask the last question.
Janice?
I have a question.
So does that mean we'll have two? You will
Okay,
have
we'll
two
go
then.
with two.
So and Jean has raised his hand as well. So Jean is one of my students as well. So
Oh, perfect. I didn't see that. So yes. So Jean, you want to go ahead first? Sorry, Rashida, just because.
So
of the
I think there's three questions, eh? So there's Jean, and there's Jerome, and there's one other.
Janice.
Janice, okay,
and
Janice.
Rashida.
Okay, go ahead, Janice.
Hi. Really great session, and I think I'll, if you don't mind, I might reach out to you later for an informational interview because I'm going to be pursuing career development in the fall.
Okay.
But my question is, I know you didn't really go into the difference between whether personality type is turbulent or assertive. I think for me, it has never been really clear about how that affects the personality type itself, let alone how it'll impact careers. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, there's some preferences that are indicators. So feelers generally tend to want harmony more, so they're going to be more collaborative. I always try to tell them that they have to be advocate for their position. They need to be assertive but not aggressive. They need to let the other person know what what they're feeling. Extroverts and introverts as well. Extroverts will tend to be more outgoing. So as a result of that, talking out loud, so taking up more space. So the introvert needs to find their space. So some pre-preparation might help. Also with the J's and the P's, the J's tend to be more definitive, so they'll be more outspoken. They may have already made a decision, whereas the P's may be more tentative, so probably a little bit less assertive. So you can make a case for how it plays out in each of the preferences. Another useful instrument is the Thomas Kilmann to identify what a person's conflict management styles are. And you could align the conflict management styles with the MBTI, in terms of who's going to be more competitive and who's going to be more collaborative. Another instrument is the FIRE-OB that really looks at interpersonal needs. So to what extent does a person want to have control? So people that have a high need to control will probably be more assertive as well. Or if people have a high need for affection, they'll be more collaborative. They'll want to help people develop. And the other dimension is inclusion, the degree to which you include others and to the degree to which you want people to include you. So there's different instruments that could look at the same situation from different lenses or perspectives.
Okay.
Does that help a little bit, Janice, or was I, as an extrovert, rambling on?
I think you clarified a bit more about how assertiveness impacts the type, but the other one, because for me, I'm ENFP-T, right? So just trying to understand what that means.
Okay. So you're going to be more big picture. You'll be willing to engage in a dialogue. You think out loud. But with the was it the T and the F that you're close on?
I'm actually more F.
Okay.
Yeah.
So was it the PJ that you're close on? One of the ones you mentioned /.
Oh, I think, sorry?
So you said that you were an ENFP?
Yeah.
But you also said, was it T afterwards?
So the way that, I mean, when I took the Myers Briggs test, it tacked on another acronym, which was turbulent versus assertive.
Okay.
Right, and that was the portion that I was just trying to understand.
So I'm not familiar with that. How did they define turbulent and assertive?
I'm not sure. That's why I was hoping you'd be able to answer that one.
Well, I'll tell you. I'll tell you what. I'll look at it, and if you could give me what specific instrument was used, because there's different variations and versions. You know, that might help.
Oh, I see. Okay, I took my test on the 16 Personalities website, so that's where it came from.
Okay, great. So I'll look into that a little bit more closely then. Okay, good.
All right, thank you.
So if you email me, I will email you back with an answer.
Yep, for sure. Thank you.
So we have 2 more questions.
Jerome said he's already had his answered.
Yeah. Okay.
So we'll take one more because unfortunately the next one. Oh.
I think Jean had his hand raised.
Okay,
so.
perfect.
Jean?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're coming through loud and clear.
Okay, good. Thank you, Dr. Sagers. I'm one of your students. As you know,
I know. It's nice to hear your voice again.
Yeah, leadership. At the McGill University Center, and I say thank you. And then I was following this session, and it was a refresher for me, going through my course that we started together. And I'm looking forward to continue after this 4th phase. So just I want to tell you that it was a very beneficial and a very good refresher for me. So thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Sean. And
that's it. I didn't have.
Well, thanks for the comment, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again when we resume in September. Because when I do the MBTI in class, it's really geared towards leadership and self-awareness and self-understanding, whereas today's session geared more specifically to career planning and development. So good.
And I benefit from that. Thank you. Yes.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for organizing this sessions. I attended a second one as well, so thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for joining us.
And thanks, Rosalie. Thanks, Rosalia, for moderating today's session and all that you've been doing to promote this virtual conference. So I'm glad to see that you're putting your leadership lessons to good use.
To be perfectly transparent, I was very stuck before taking the leadership program. So you definitely have actually a big part in this. So thank you. And thank you to the CATS team. They've worked hard all week. They've done exceptional work, and I'm so glad that it's obviously been of value to many of you. So thank you. Unfortunately, we do have to end here because we have another session starting here in 10 minutes, which I invite you to attend as well. We're going to talk about the art of growth with Sonia DeMello, who is also an instructor at the McGill School of Continuing Studies and an entrepreneur, and has some really great experience and has been on in different sessions here with us today. Dr. Sagers, thank you so much again. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. You've had lots of excellent comments in the chat, which you didn't see, but I can send to you. They were, lots of appreciation for your session here today. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Rosalia.
Take care, everyone.
And thanks, everyone.